this afternoon. The All-Share Index high by a relatively flat 0.02%, financials 15, making gains of 0.3%, industrials 25, 0.31%. Now, stagnant salaries amid the high interest rates and inflationary environment are eroding consumers' disposable income. This according to Debtbusters' first quarter debt index. The data also highlights that high debt in the current climate is primarily behind the wiping out of the middle class as the group faces the brunt of diminishing disposable incomes. Benay Sega, who's executive head of Debtbusters, joins us to unpack the index and its findings in greater detail. Benay, an absolute pleasure and a good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Nolutanda. Great to be on the show.
Brilliant. Benay, when we hear that a debt to annual income ratio is stable over the last 3 quarters at 107%, help us put this into context, please.
Yeah, it's a good question because this is an internationally known and accepted metric. And when you look at many other countries, it hovers around between 140 to 100, in some cases 200%. For example, in the case of Australia, it's really high, around 200%. But what happens in a country like Australia is most of that debt is tied in mortgages that happen to be very, very low interest rates, somewhere between 2 to 3% per annum. In our case, in terms of what we look at, this comparable metric has been hovering around 118 to 120% up until a couple of quarters ago. So we're pleased to see that it's come down to 106, 107% range. And it's just an indication for a typical median working person, what is their total debt divided by their annual income. It's just a metric to give us an idea if you wanted to pay all your debt at once, how many times of your multiples of your annual income you're going to need. So it doesn't sound like a big movement, but actually it's quite a substantial movement, and we would be happy to see it at these levels. Even though it's still elevated, it's much better than what we were looking at about a year ago.
A very sobering metric, I would say, Benay. Let's talk then about the fact that salaries have remained reasonably stagnant, and where we have seen increases just due to the high inflationary environment, those increases have been eroded. What that now means for the indebtedness of South Africans and the affordability in terms of repaying that debt.
Yeah, we still see consumers needing 62% of their take-home pay to service their debt obligations. And part of the reason for that is 2 things. Like you said, the incomes haven't really grown. So in that environment, it's difficult to make your money stretch as much as you want to. And I think this is something that is important to keep in mind. And the second thing is interest rates have gone up compared to 2020 and 2021, low interest rates. To put into context, many of the debt, about half of the debt or half of the obligations that people come to us with would be what we call unsecured debt. So it would be a combination of credit cards, money owed to stores, personal loans, short-term loans, and so on. On average, we see that the interest rates for those when consumer comes to us is in excess of 25% per annum. That's 25.7% per annum. Just a few short years ago, when interest rates were really low, that was below 21%. Now it's up by 4 percentage points. It's substantial in terms of what we need to service. And because it makes up 50% of the incoming cohort's debt pile, it really just eats away at that salary that we're taking home. And that's why I think we're really finding ourselves not being able to stretch our money as much as we would like to.
I also want to chat about the demand for debt here, and where we are seeing people mostly indebted, Benay. I think when we read the data that comes from Debtbusters, it is from people who do have families, who do have homes. It's just people who are trying to get by.
Yeah, it's true. We've seen a certain increase in 2 areas. And I think before I go into that, I just want to say that, we think about debt counseling. It's actually a responsible thing to do. These are consumers who are taking the necessary steps to repay back their debt, and they're facing up to the difficult challenge, particularly if you consider how economically difficult 2023 has been, combination of inflation, interest rates, load shedding and everything else. What we've seen is that our online tools, which are free for consumers to engage with on the website, we've seen a 30% increase in terms of the take up for that, in terms of new subscribers. And there, what we're really pleased to see is that people are really learning about debt. They're learning about debt management. They're seeing the different tools and different ways of looking at their finances, which is very helpful rather than just looking at one score, which is traditionally their credit score. They're expanding their horizons and they're really understanding how to deal with it. The second thing we saw is that in the actual interest in terms of inquiries for debt counseling, that was also up 22% compared to the same period last year. So while South Africans are in a difficult spot in terms of debt and debt repayments, we are pleased to see that people are taking the necessary steps to really improve their lives, because this is a long-term commitment, and it's going to pay dividends in 3 to 5 years in terms of what they're doing.
Also, they also want to get to the bottom of what we might be seeing, just in terms of being able to see the demographics that are demanding the most credit right now, or ones that might be approaching debt busters. Also, Benay, asking for assistance here, and what it tells us about this specific age group, the specific earnings bracket as well.
Yeah, certainly. So one age category that has increased in terms of demand is those over the 45 and older, which I happen to be in that category as well, and I understand the financial stress that comes with that age group. But what you're also seeing is people are far more intent and deliberate about dealing with debt and debt repayments before they go into retirement. I think we've certainly seen that group. It used to be about 19% of our incoming cohort. Now it's about 31%. We've also seen a slight uptick in terms of the average age of who's coming. It used to be about 37. Now it's about 40. So it's a slight increase. In terms of the younger people, often what you find is that they are going to have less debt. And I think, to put it into perspective, if you look at the similar metric that we were using before, debt exposure to net annual income ratio, that is for people for the age of 45 and older, it's about 128%. Whereas for people, let's say 30 and younger, it's somewhere between 65 to 80%. So what that tells me is if you actually understand your debt and if you understand your debt profile before you get to a particular age, I would say you have a much better way of dealing with it and making a path. Debt is on the opposite side of the coin of credit. Credit becomes debt and becomes burdensome when you're unable to deal with it. So credit in itself is not a bad thing at all. But I think what we want to convey is start early. Understand your credit and debt profile so you can deal with it. I think the younger we catch it, the much better option we have in terms of dealing with it.
Well, Benay, it's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for shedding light on this very important metric for us this afternoon. That was Benay Sega.